Say sorry to her immediately, or I am filing for divorce. My husband Derek screamed, his voice echoing across the restaurant. I looked down at my $4,000 white silk dress. It was completely ruined, dripping with the red wine my younger sister Kiara had just deliberately poured over my chest. Kiara stood behind Derek with a triumphant smirk on her face, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly. My mother Evelyn, sitting across the table, nodded firmly in agreement with him. They expected me to break down, cry, and apologize for ruining my 5th wedding anniversary dinner. Instead, I simply smiled, leaned in close to my husband, and whispered 5 final words. I froze your bank accounts. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members. You will want to hear exactly how fast their smug smiles vanished. I am Maya, 34 years old, and a forensic data auditor. Tonight was supposed to be a private celebration for my 5th wedding anniversary with Derek. I booked the private dining room at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Atlanta. I paid the $2,000 deposit myself because Derek claimed his business capital was tied up in a new investment. But when I arrived, I found a table set for 10. Derek had invited my mother, my half-sister Kiara, her husband Chad, and several other relatives without telling me. This was the dynamic I had endured my entire life. Kiara was the golden child with her lighter skin and perfect hair. She could do no wrong. I was the dark-skinned, heavy-set workhorse who was only useful when it was time to foot the bill. Why is everyone here, Derek? I had asked quietly when I first walked in and saw the crowd. Chad, Kiara's arrogant white husband, immediately chimed in with his usual condescending tone. Oh, come on, Maya, stop being so hostile. Derek just wanted to share his success with the family. You do not need to be an angry black woman tonight. I swallowed my anger and took my seat. The dinner dragged on painfully. Derek ordered the most expensive items on the menu, expensive steaks, lobsters, and bottles of imported champagne. He played the role of the wealthy, generous provider perfectly. My mother praised him endlessly, loudly complaining about how lucky I was that a handsome entrepreneur like Derek had settled for someone like me. Then came the toast. Derek stood up, raised his glass, and looked directly at Kiara instead of me. To family, he said, and to exciting new beginnings. Kiara giggled loudly, stood up, and reached across the table to clink her glass against his. As she did, she aggressively shoved her arm forward, tipping her full glass of red wine directly onto my lap and chest. The icy liquid soaked through my silk dress instantly. Oops, my hand slipped, Kiara said loudly, not sounding sorry at all. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Are you kidding me, Kiara? I asked, my voice deadly calm. That was when Derek exploded. He slammed his hands on the table and demanded I apologize to her or face a divorce. The absolute audacity of the man standing there defending the woman who had just assaulted me took my breath away. But I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I knew something they did not know. I knew about the secret text messages on his phone. I knew the baby Kiara was carrying belonged to him. And most importantly, as a forensic auditor, I knew exactly where they had been hiding all the money they had stolen from me. I calmly picked up my black credit card from my purse. I dropped it onto the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of the stunned waiter. Charge this for my steak and my sparkling water only, I instructed him. Then I turned back to Derek and Kiara. I delivered my 5 words. I froze your bank accounts. I turned around and walked out of the dining room with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear Derek laughing loudly, telling my mother and Chad that I was just being dramatic and crazy. He told everyone to order desserts. He had no idea I had spent the last 6 months systematically, legally securing every single penny of my generational wealth. 10 minutes later, as I pulled out of the valet parking lot, my phone buzzed with an alert. A massive charge for $8,500 had just been declined. The nightmare was just beginning for them. As my car glided down the highway, My phone screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. Declined. 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 Derek was desperately swiping every credit card in his designer wallet, unaware that I had spent my afternoon on the phone with the fraud departments of 6 different banks. I had legally removed myself as guarantor on his secondary accounts. Without my spotless credit history and my income backing him, his financial house of cards instantly collapsed. Within minutes, my phone began to ring. It was Derek. I let it go straight to voicemail. Then came a text. Maya, stop playing games and unfreeze the card right now. This is embarrassing. I smiled, keeping my eyes on the road. I knew exactly what was happening inside that private dining room. The waiter had undoubtedly returned to the table, leaning in close to quietly inform my so-called wealthy husband that his payment method was invalid. Derek, desperate to maintain his facade in front of my mother and the rest of the family, probably laughed it off as a bank error before handing over another card, then another. When the third card failed, the polite discretion of the staff vanished. Belmont's does not tolerate unpaid bills. I received a second voicemail, this time from my mother. Her voice was trembling with a mix of panic and rage. Maya, you need to call the restaurant right now and fix this. The manager is standing here and he is threatening to call the police. You are humiliating your sister on her special night. How could you be so selfish? I did not text back. I simply saved the audio file to a secure cloud drive. I was building a timeline, and every angry voicemail was another piece of evidence. According to frantic texts from my cousin at the table, the situation escalated quickly. The general manager arrived with 2 burly security guards blocking the exit. Derek was sweating, patting his pockets, making excuses about a frozen corporate account. Kiara was practically in tears, her smug attitude completely shattered as diners from the main room began to peek into their private section. That was when Chad had to step in. Chad, Kiara's husband, was a real estate broker who loved playing the white savior to my black family. He thrived on the feeling of superiority it gave him. He pulled out his credit card to pay, but not before making a scene. My cousin texted me the exact words Chad used. I guess I am bailing out the family again, Chad had announced, loudly sighing as he handed his platinum card to the manager. You know, Derek, financial literacy is something we really need to sit down and discuss. You cannot keep living beyond your means and expecting me to clean up the mess. My mother sat there in silence, allowing this man to insult her son-in-law simply because he was paying the check. Kiara clung to Chad's arm, playing the fragile victim. The sheer hypocrisy of it all was sickening. For years, I was the one quietly paying the mortgage on my mother's house. I was the one who funded Kiara's lavish wedding to Chad because his family refused to contribute. But because I did not boast about my money or throw it around to control people, I was treated like the help. Not anymore. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from the security app connected to Derek's sports car. The car was registered in my name, purchased with my bonus 2 years ago, though he loved to tell his friends it was a gift to himself for closing a big deal. The app showed the engine starting and the vehicle aggressively pulling out of the restaurant parking lot. Derek was coming home. He was furious, embarrassed, and looking for a fight. He thought he could just storm into our house, yell at me until I backed down, and force me to fix his life. He was severely underestimating the woman he had married. As I watched the little car icon speed down the digital map, I decided to give him a taste of the control he was about to lose permanently. I opened the vehicle management portal on my phone. With 2 taps, I accessed the administrative controls. I disabled the car's GPS navigation system, shut off the premium audio, and engaged the valet mode, which instantly capped the car's maximum speed at 40 miles per hour. The map icon suddenly slowed down. Derek tried to call me again, probably screaming into his steering wheel as delivery trucks blew past his crippled sports car. It was almost too easy. But that was just the appetizer. The real shock was waiting for him at the front door. It took him another 45 minutes to limp his artificially slowed sports car up our long driveway. I sat perfectly still in the dark leather armchair in our formal living room, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The mahogany front door shuddered under the force of a violent kick. Derek was not bothering with his keys. He kicked it a second time, the deadbolt groaning in protest, before he finally fumbled his key into the lock and shoved the door open. He stumbled into the foyer. His tailored suit jacket discarded, his silk tie loosened around his neck. His chest heaved with exertion and rage. He looked nothing like the polished entrepreneur he pretended to be just an hour ago. He looked like exactly what he was, a desperate cornered fraud. "Turn the accounts back on right now." "Maya," he roared, slamming the front door so hard the photographs on the wall rattled. "You have completely lost your mind. You humiliated me in front of Chad and your mother. You made me look like a broke joke at Belmont's, I did. Not move. I just watched him pace the floor like a trapped animal." "I made you look broke," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, you are broke. You have been broke for 2 years. You just forgot because you were too busy spending my money on my sister." He froze, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before the mask slammed back into place. "You are acting crazy," he sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are paranoid and jealous because Kiara is pregnant. If you do not unlock my cards by tomorrow, I am going to the church board. I will tell Pastor Thomas and the entire congregation that you are having a mental breakdown. I will tell them you are a bitter, infertile woman, trying to destroy your family out of spite. They already love your mother more than you. Who do you think they will believe? I will ruin your reputation in this community." "Maya." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that seemed to infuriate him even more. I slowly stood up from the armchair and gestured toward the sweeping, curved staircase to his left. He turned his head. Lined up neatly at the base of the stairs were 4 large designer suitcases, 2 golf bags, and a cardboard box containing his collection of expensive watches. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave. "This is your exit," I replied smoothly. "You wanted a divorce at the restaurant. I am simply facilitating your request. You can take your bags and leave my house." "My house," he barked, letting out a sharp, unhinged laugh. "This is our house, Maya. Half of this $1.2 million property belongs to me. You cannot kick me out." "Actually, Derek, I can," I said, taking a slow step forward. "The deed is entirely in my name. The mortgage is paid exclusively from my personal account. Your name is nowhere on the closing documents because your credit score was too low when we bought it. You are legally nothing more than a tenant, and your lease has just been terminated." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face, replaced rapidly by a dark, dangerous flush. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. He looked around the pristine foyer, his eyes darting frantically until they landed on the heavy crystal vase resting on the entryway table. It was a wedding gift from my grandmother. Without warning, Derek lunged forward, grabbed the heavy crystal vase, and hurled it directly at my head. I did not flinch. I ducked slightly, and the heavy glass shattered violently against the stone fireplace behind me, sending razor-sharp shards exploding across the expensive Persian rug. "You psychotic little monster!" He started to scream, taking a threatening step toward me. I raised my hand, silencing him. I looked down at my phone screen and tapped the large green playback button. The crystal-clear audio of his voice echoed through the living room. "I will ruin your reputation in this community, Maya." Then came the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Derek froze, his eyes glued to my phone. "I just installed a state-of-the-art hidden security system yesterday," I informed him cheerfully. "High-definition cameras and audio recording in every room. The system is directly linked to a secure cloud server and my personal lawyer. And more importantly," I tapped my screen one more time, "it has a built-in panic button, right on cue." The faint, high-pitched wail of police sirens began to echo through the quiet suburban neighborhood, growing louder and louder with every passing second. The wail of police sirens snapped Derek out of his violent trance. Knowing he could not explain the shattered glass while reeking of alcohol, he grabbed a single suitcase and bolted out the door. I watched his sports car sputter away in valet mode, just as flashing lights turned onto my street. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting behind my sleek glass desk at my downtown corporate office. As an independent forensic data auditor, I was used to dealing with messy financial situations, but nothing prepared me for the man who suddenly barged through my office doors. It was Chad. He completely ignored my receptionist, pushing his way into my workspace with the arrogant entitlement only a mediocre white man who married into a wealthy black family could possess. He slammed the door and dropped into the chair across from my desk, letting out a heavy, exasperated sigh. "Good morning, Chad," I said calmly, not looking up from my monitors. "I see you still struggle with the concept of appointments." "Maya, we need to talk." He started using that slow, patronizing tone he reserved exclusively for me. "You need to stop this right now." I spent the entire morning calming Derek down. "You are acting completely out of control." I folded my hands on my desk and stared at him, waiting. "You are letting your emotions dictate your actions," he went on, pointing a finger at me. "You are overreacting over a spilled glass of wine. Freezing his accounts and kicking him out of the house is irrational. You need to take a deep breath and stop being the stereotypical angry black woman. You are destroying your marriage, and more importantly, you are destroying his business." I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I did not raise my voice or react to his racial microaggressions. Instead, I focused entirely on his last sentence. "Destroying his business," I repeated flatly. "Chad Derek does not have a business. He has a rented office space and a fabricated job title." Chad scoffed, rolling his eyes as if I were a child who did not understand finance. "That shows how disconnected you are from your husband," he sneered. "Derek is a visionary. In fact, he is the top investor in my new commercial real estate development fund. He just committed another $200,000 to the project last week. Your little tantrum with his bank accounts is holding up a major acquisition." The puzzle pieces in my mind suddenly slammed together with terrifying precision. Derek had no income. His accounts were entirely funded by an allowance I provided, which I had slowly been reducing. If Derek was Chad's top investor, where was that massive amount of capital coming from? My mind raced back to the sudden lavish spending my mother had been doing lately, the whispered conversations between her and Chad at family barbecues, and the way they always dismissed me when I asked about my late grandfather's estate. It hit me like a freight train. They were not just reckless spenders, they were running a shell company scam. Chad was using Derek as a front to funnel and launder my family's generational wealth out of my mother's control and into his own fraudulent investment portfolio. Derek was willingly playing the middleman in exchange for a cut to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle with my sister. They were stealing the inheritance my grandfather built from the ground up. "You think you are so smart, Chad?" I said softly, opening the bottom drawer of my desk. "You think because I do not parade my wealth around that I am ignorant to how money moves." Chad smirked, leaning back. "Look, Maya, I am just trying to help you save your family. Unfreeze the accounts and let the men handle the business." I pulled a thick, neatly bound printed dossier from my drawer and tossed it onto the glass desk. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding directly in front of his hands. "I suggest you open that before you give me any more financial advice," I replied. Chad let out a condescending chuckle, but picked up the folder and flipped open the cover. The color instantly drained from his face. His arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He was staring at 30 pages of bank statements, wire transfer logs, and encrypted routing numbers. It was a complete, comprehensive record of every single offshore account he held in the Cayman Islands, every hidden LLC, every illegally sheltered dollar. How he whispered, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the folder. "You are not the only one who knows how to move money, Chad. I said, leaning forward. But unlike you, I know exactly how to find it. Chad did not say another single word to me at all. He scrambled out of his chair, leaving the thick dossier on my desk, and bolted right out of my office. His desperate retreat told me absolutely everything I needed to know. They were completely exposed now. Before I could savor the sweet victory, my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed my mother, Evelyn. I ignored the first 3 calls, but she sent a text message demanding I come to the family house right away. She said it was an emergency that could not wait. I packed my briefcase, locked my office, and drove to the sprawling colonial house where I grew up. The beautiful house my grandfather built from scratch and left to her. When I walked through the heavy oak front door, I found an ambush waiting. My mother was sitting stiffly on the living room sofa, dressed immaculately in a beige suit, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Derek was sitting in the armchair across from her, looking smug. The suitcase he had grabbed from my house last night was sitting in the corner. I stopped in the doorway, my grip tightening on my briefcase. "What is this?" I asked flatly, refusing to step any further into the room. "Sit down," Maya, my mother ordered, gesturing to the empty space next to her. "We really need to talk about this foolishness. You are embarrassing this family." I did not move. "Foolishness," I repeated, staring directly at Derek. "Did he tell you what he actually did at the restaurant last night? Or did he conveniently leave out the part where he demanded I apologize to the woman who threw wine on me?" My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Maya. It was just a little spilled wine. Kiara is clumsy. You are making a mountain out of a molehill. But kicking your husband out of his home and freezing his bank accounts is unacceptable behavior for a wife." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her blatant emotional manipulation. "He is stealing from us." "Mom," I said, my voice rising, "he is using Chad to launder our family money. He does not love me, and he has been unfaithful." My mother stood up, her face twisting into a scowl. "Unfaithful," she scoffed. "So what? All men stray." Maya, a strong black woman, keeps her family together. She does not throw her marriage away over a bruised ego. You need to unlock those accounts right now so Derek can finish his real estate deal. If you ruin his business, you ruin this entire family. His business? I laughed bitterly. He has absolutely no business. He is a fraud. He has been draining the accounts to fund a fake lifestyle. How can you defend him after everything I have done for you? I pay your mortgage, Mom. I pay your utility bills. I am the reason you can still afford this house. My mother suddenly looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a sickening grin spreading across his smug face. "Actually, Maya," my mother said softly, losing her authoritative edge, "you do not pay the mortgage here anymore." I stopped breathing. The silence was deafening. "What did you just say?" I asked, my heart pounding. My heart. "Derek needed collateral for his new commercial fund," she explained. Looking down at her perfectly manicured nails, the bank would not approve the big loan without a hard asset, so I signed the deed of this house over to Derek. He is going to give it back next month. You did not need to know, because you are always so negative about his investments. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. She had signed away my grandfather's legacy. She handed over the house we were standing in to a man actively draining our wealth. Derek now held the deed to my childhood home. He let out a mocking chuckle. "I told you, Maya," he said, leaning forward. "You do not hold all the cards. You need to unlock my accounts today, or I will sell this house right out from under your mother." Before I could process the horrible betrayal, I heard the slow creak of the wooden stairs directly behind me. I slowly turned around. Kiara was walking down the staircase wearing a silk robe. Around her neck were my grandmother pearls. Kiara reached the bottom step and confidently placed her hand on her stomach, rubbing a visibly round, pregnant belly. She looked at me, smiled widely, and walked straight over to Derek. She sat on the arm of his chair, and he proudly placed his hand over hers on her stomach. The golden child was happily carrying my own husband baby. I stared at her stomach for a long moment, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the scene playing out in front of me. Kiara looked down at her belly with a gentle maternal smile before looking back up at me with eyes full of fake pity. "I am so sorry, Maya," she murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We never meant for this to happen. Derek and I just connected on a level he never had with you. It was an accident at first, but now we are having a family." I felt a sharp physical ache in my chest, not from heartbreak, but from the profound disgust I felt for the people in this room. My own mother was sitting there watching her younger daughter flaunt a pregnancy by my husband, and she did not even have the decency to look ashamed. She actually looked proud. "We are a family," Evelyn chimed in, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt. "And families make sacrifices for each other. Maya, you have a very successful career, you make excellent money, and you can easily afford to buy yourself a nice condominium downtown. Kiara does not have those resources. She needs a stable home to raise my grandchild." "So, what are you saying?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, despite the storm raging inside me. "I am saying, you need to be the bigger person," Evelyn stated plainly. "You need to move out of the house. Derek has agreed to let you take your personal belongings, but the property itself needs to stay with him and Kiara. It is only fair since he has been paying for the maintenance. And you have been so hostile lately." I almost laughed out loud at the delusion. Derek had not paid for a single light bulb in that house, let alone the maintenance. But arguing with them was useless. They had completely rewritten reality to fit their greedy narrative. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the coffee table between us. "It is a voluntary eviction agreement," he explained, leaning back in his chair with a smug, arrogant grin. "If you sign this and hand over your keys today, I will not take you to court for spousal support. I will let you walk away clean. We can keep this quiet and your little perfect professional reputation stays intact." Kiara sniffled, wiping away a non-existent tear. "Please, Maya, just do this for the baby. We really need a fresh start." I looked at the three of them. My mother, the enabler. My sister, the thief. My husband, the fraud. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought my pride would make me fight them, tooth and nail, over the house, keeping the assets tied up in messy divorce litigation for years. They wanted me to fight because it would give Chad and Derek time to move the stolen money offshore. But I was not going to give them the satisfaction of a fight. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my eyes to drop to the floor, projecting the image of a broken, defeated woman. "Fine," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to make it believable. "You win." I reached into my purse and pulled out my favorite silver pen. I leaned over the coffee table and signed my name on the dotted line of Derek. Ridiculous homemade agreement. Then I reached into my pocket, pulled out my heavy ring of house keys, and dropped them onto the table with a loud metallic clatter. They sounded like prison bars slamming shut. Kiara let out a loud squeal of delight and threw her arms around Derek's neck. Evelyn finally smiled, nodding at me in approval. "It is for the best, Maya," she said gently. "You will see. This is how God wanted it to be." I did not say another word. I turned around and walked out of the house, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me. The moment the cool outside air hit my face, my defeated posture vanished. I stood up perfectly straight, pulled my phone from my pocket, and dialed a secure encrypted number. The line rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Agent Harris speaking." I walked toward my car, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "It is Maya," I said, my voice crisp and professional. "The trap is set. They took the bait perfectly. Derek and Kiara are moving into the property today. They are claiming it as their primary residence." "Excellent," Agent Harris replied. "We will have eyes on the perimeter by tonight. If he moves the physical shell company ledgers into that house, we have him on federal possession." "Yes," I replied, sliding into the driver's seat of my car. Every single fraudulent asset will now be in one centralized location. Do not move in until they get comfortable. Let them unpack. Let them think they won. Let them think they won. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the charade was in full swing. I parked my rental car down the street, hidden behind a row of large oak trees, and watched my own driveway through a pair of high-powered binoculars. The front of my beautiful suburban home was lined with expensive cars. Derek had apparently wasted no time throwing a massive combined baby shower and housewarming party to celebrate his victory over me. He even hired a local valet service to park the cars of my treacherous family members and his fake business associates. Loud music thumped from the backyard, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I opened the Instagram app on my phone and tapped on Kiara's profile. She was broadcasting live to her thousands of followers. "Hey everyone, welcome to our new home," Kiara squealed into the camera, spinning around in the grand foyer of my house. She was wearing a tight designer maternity dress, holding a crystal flute of sparkling cider. Derek surprised me with this gorgeous $1.2 million estate for the baby. We are just so incredibly blessed. Derek walked into the frame, kissing her cheek and waving smugly at the camera. He looked completely relaxed, totally unaware that federal agents were currently logging his every move. Kiara walked the camera through my custom kitchen, showing off the marble countertops and the massive island where a team of professional caterers was busy preparing expensive hors d'oeuvres. She pointed the camera at my mother Evelyn, who was sitting on the patio laughing and drinking champagne with Chad. It was sickening to watch them celebrate their theft so openly, but the illusion of their grand victory was about to shatter in real time. I kept my eyes glued to the phone screen as the live broadcast continued. A man in a crisp white chef coat, the head of the luxury catering company, suddenly walked into the frame and approached Derek. The chef did not look happy. He leaned in and whispered something into Derek's ear. Derek's smile faltered instantly. He shook his head and pulled his designer wallet from his pocket, handing the chef a sleek credit card. Kiara kept the camera rolling, oblivious to the tension building behind her as she showed off the custom drapes I had paid for last year. A few minutes later, the chef returned. This time, he did not whisper. His voice was loud enough to be picked up clearly by the microphone on Kiara's phone. "Sir, every single card you have given me has been declined," the chef stated firmly. "And the certified check you provided this morning just bounced. My company does not work for free." Derek's face turned a dark shade of crimson. He aggressively grabbed the chef by the arm, trying to pull him away from the camera. "Keep your voice down," Derek hissed. "It is just a temporary freeze on my corporate accounts. I will wire you the money on Monday." The chef yanked his arm out of Derek's grasp. "You will pay me right now or we are leaving," he demanded. The music in the backyard suddenly seemed much quieter as the party guests started to notice the commotion. Chad stood up from his patio chair, looking annoyed. Kiara finally realized what was happening and lowered her phone, but she forgot to end the live broadcast. The thousands of people watching online heard the chef issue his final order. "Pack it up," the chef yelled to his staff. "Pull the food from the tables and load the vans. We are leaving right now." Utter chaos erupted in my kitchen. The catering staff immediately began snatching plates of lobster canapes and truffles right out of the hands of the stunned guests. They wheeled tall carts of food out the front door, ignoring my mother's frantic demands to stop. Derek was screaming at the chef, threatening to sue him, while Chad frantically pulled out his phone, probably trying to access his own frozen offshore accounts to save face. The humiliation was absolute, and it was being broadcast live to the entire city. But the caterers leaving was only the beginning of their nightmare. Just as the last catering van peeled out of my driveway, a heavy white sport utility vehicle with bright municipal decals pulled up to the curb. Two uniformed officers from the county sheriff department stepped out. They walked with purpose straight up the manicured walkway and past the confused party guests. One of the deputies was holding a large clipboard and a thick stack of legal documents. Derek stormed out the front door to meet them, puffing out his chest. "Can I help you?" he barked, still trying to act like the wealthy lord of the manor. The deputy did not even blink. He stepped past Derek and firmly slapped a bright orange piece of paper directly onto the mahogany front door. "This property is officially under federal foreclosure," the deputy announced loudly. "You have unpaid back taxes totaling over $300,000, and this address was listed as your primary business asset. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before you are forcibly removed." The heavy silence following the deputy announcement was deafening. Derek stood frozen on the front porch, staring at the bright orange paper as if it were written in a foreign language. He opened his mouth to argue, but the deputies simply turned around, walked back to their vehicle, and drove away. Remaining guests began awkwardly shuffling toward their cars, whispering and avoiding eye contact. While Derek humiliated himself, Chad quietly slipped away from the patio and rushed into the downstairs study. He locked the heavy oak door behind him, pulling his phone and a secure laptop from his leather messenger bag. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. The thick dossier I dropped on his desk that morning was no longer just a warning. It was a countdown. Chad opened his laptop and booted up the encrypted portal he used to access his hidden Cayman Islands accounts. The screen glowed blue, casting a pale light on his sweating face. He typed in his complex password and hit enter. He needed to move the stolen funds to an untouchable crypto wallet before the federal government realized the connection between Derek Property and his investment firm. The loading wheel spun for 5 agonizing seconds. Then the screen flashed a bright, glaring red. A bold white error message appeared across the display. "Access denied, federal hold." Chad stopped breathing. He frantically typed in the credentials for his secondary offshore account. "Access denied." He tried the holding company he registered under Kiara name. "Access denied." Every digital vault he meticulously built over the last 3 years was locked shut. The money was gone. All of it. Not just the money he and Derek had siphoned from my family estate, but the capital from his legitimate wealthy clients as well. He was completely ruined. A deep primal rage erupted inside him. He slammed the laptop shut and stormed out of the study, his face flushed purple. He marched through the house, ignoring my mother, who was frantically asking him what was going on. He pushed past the remaining stragglers in the foyer and burst out the front door. Derek was still standing on the lawn, desperately trying to call his lawyer. Chad did not hesitate. He crossed the grass in 3 long strides, grabbed Derek by the lapels of his expensive custom suit, and slammed him hard against the brick facade of the house. "What did you tell her?" Chad screamed, spit flying from his lips. "What did you say to your crazy wife, Derek?" Derek dropped his phone, holding up his hands in defense. "I did not tell her anything, Chad. I swear I do not know how she found out about the taxes." "Get your hands off me!" he yelled, trying to shove Chad away. Chad did not let go. Instead, he pulled Derek forward and shoved him violently into the manicured hedges. "You idiot!" Chad roared. "She did not just freeze your checking account. She triggered a federal hold on everything. My offshore accounts are locked, Derek. We are facing wire fraud charges. You led her right to my door." Derek scrambled to his feet, his expensive suit torn and covered in dirt. The 2 men lunged at each other, grappling on the front lawn like common street thugs. My mother shrieked from the porch, while Kiara sobbed loudly, begging them to stop. Neighbors who had been watching the catering fiasco now stood openly in their driveways, holding their phones up to record the physical brawl. The golden child perfect husband and the arrogant white savior were rolling around in the landscaping, destroying the manicured lawn of a foreclosed home. It was exactly the type of public humiliation they had always terrified me with, now happening to them in broad daylight. Sitting in my rental car down the street, I watched the entire pathetic scene unfold through my binoculars. Chad finally landed a heavy, brutal punch directly to Derek's jaw, leaving him groaning in the wet grass before storming off to his luxury car. As Derek lay there, weakly spitting dark blood into the grass, his cell phone suddenly buzzed next to his ear. He slowly answered it, putting it on speakerphone. It was the private investigator he had hired earlier that morning to dig up dirt on me for the divorce proceedings. Derek, you need to listen to me very carefully. The investigator voice crackled through the speaker, sounding completely panicked. You need to hire criminal defense counsel immediately. I just pulled Maya professional licensing records. She is not just a corporate accountant, Derek. She is a contracted forensic data auditor for the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. She builds major federal indictments for a living right now. You messed with the wrong woman. They are coming for you and Chad today. The phone slipped from Derek, fingers falling into the grass. He stared at the sky as the private investigator words echoed. Chad stopped walking toward his car. He turned around, his face devoid of color. Did he say Internal Revenue Service? Chad asked. Derek could only nod dumbly. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They had not just stolen from a scorned wife. They had stolen from a federal auditor. Get up, Chad hissed, rushing back over and hauling Derek to his feet. We need a lawyer right now, not a divorce lawyer, a criminal defense attorney. Soon they sat in the downtown office of Marcus Vance, a sleazy attorney specializing in keeping criminals out of prison. They had no cash. Marcus leaned back. I need a $200,000 retainer, he stated. Chad pulled out his phone. I know a private lender, he said. It is a predatory loan with a 40% interest rate, but he will wire the funds to your trust account within the hour using the unencumbered equity in my commercial building. Marcus smiled a predatory grin. Perfect, he said. Now let us talk strategy. How do we keep you two out of federal custody today? My wife froze the accounts, Derek explained frantically. She works for the government and knows about the shell companies. Marcus let out a dark chuckle. You are only trapped if you let her control the narrative, he said, leaning forward. She is an accountant, right? She had access to your books. She froze the accounts to cover her own tracks. Do you not see it? Marcus continued, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. Your wife is a financial expert. She used her federal knowledge to embezzle money from your investment fund. When she realized you were catching on, she manufactured a marital dispute to freeze the accounts and frame you. We just need the paper trail to prove it. Chad's face lit up with a twisted sense of hope. You want us to frame her, he asked. I want you to provide the evidence that she was the authorized signatory on the offshore transfers, Marcus corrected smoothly. If she signed the wire authorizations, she is the one guilty of wire fraud. Do you have those documents? Chad swallowed hard. No, he admitted. I authorized everything digitally using a secure key. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. Then you better find some hard copies with her signature on them very quickly, he said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Provide the documents and I will destroy her credibility. 30 minutes later, Chad and Derek were frantically pacing inside Chad's corporate office. It was Saturday, so the building was completely deserted. Chad booted up his desktop computer and opened a folder containing dozens of blank wire transfer authorization forms. He hit print. The large, heavy-duty commercial printer in the corner of the room whirred to life, spitting out stack after stack of crisp white paper. Derek grabbed a blue ink pen, his hands trembling slightly. Are you sure about this? He asked, looking at the blank signature lines. Forging federal financial documents carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Chad snatched the pen out of his hand. We are already looking at 20 years for the shell companies, you coward, Chad snapped. If we pin this on Maya, we walk away clean. She is the auditor. The jury will believe she manipulated us. Just sign her name exactly like it looks on your marriage certificate. Derek took a deep breath, gripped the pen, and carefully began forging my signature on the bottom of the first document. He traced the letters slowly, trying to match my exact handwriting. He signed the second document, then a third. Chad stood over his shoulder, nodding in approval. They thought they were brilliant. They thought they had just engineered the perfect escape from federal prosecution. They were completely wrong. Sitting in my rental car, safely parked 3 miles away, I watched the entire criminal conspiracy unfold in brilliant high-definition video on my tablet. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. 6 months ago, when Chad complained about needing new office equipment, I generously bought him that top-of-the-line commercial printer. I also personally installed it. He had no idea I had embedded a microscopic wireless camera directly into the digital display panel of the printer. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of his desk. I tapped the screen of my tablet, saving the live video feed directly to the federal evidence server. I was watching them commit multiple counts of aggravated identity theft and evidence tampering in real time. And the best part was, they were handing me the exact proof I needed to put them away forever. As the live video feed of their pathetic forgery session ended, I securely backed up the files and closed my tablet. Derek and Chad thought they had outsmarted me, but they were simply building their own prison cell block by block. However, desperate criminals are entirely unpredictable. They knew the forged documents would only hold up if my credibility was completely destroyed. They needed to paint me as an unhinged, vindictive woman who was capable of extreme retaliation. So they decided to play their most pathetic card yet. They used the golden child. The very next morning, I was back at my desk in the corporate office, reviewing the final asset forfeiture logs. At exactly 10:15, my receptionist buzzed my intercom. Her voice sounded tight and anxious. "Maya, there are 2 police detectives here to see you," she said. "They say it is an urgent matter regarding your sister." "Send them in," I replied calmly, already anticipating their next desperate move. The heavy glass doors swung open, and 2 stern-looking detectives walked into my office. They did not smile. They carried official leather binders and looked at me with a distinct mixture of pity and suspicion, reserved for domestic disputes. Miss Jackson, the taller detective, began refusing the chair I offered him. "We are here regarding a formal complaint filed against you late last night by your sister Kiara." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, resting my hands flat on the cool glass desk. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. "What exactly is my sister claiming?" The second detective flipped open his notepad, his expression hardening. "Your sister came into the precinct visibly distraught. She filed a sworn affidavit stating that you showed up at her new residence yesterday afternoon. She claims you aggressively forced your way inside, threw a heavy glass object at her, and screamed violent threats directed at her and her unborn child. She stated you promised to make sure that baby never saw the inside of a nursery. Because she is pregnant, these allegations constitute felony aggravated assault and domestic terroristic threats. She is currently seeking an emergency protective order against you." The sheer audacity of the lie was almost impressive. Derek and Chad had clearly coached her. A temporary restraining order based on threats of violence would immediately flag my federal security clearance. It would force an administrative suspension from my government auditing contracts. They were trying to strip me of my power and force a rapid divorce settlement to make the criminal investigation go away. They thought using a pregnant woman tears was an unbeatable strategy. "Detectives," I said, keeping my posture completely relaxed, "these are extremely serious allegations. Can you tell me the exact time frame my sister claims this violent assault took place?" The taller detective checked the police report. "She was very specific," he answered. "She stated the incident occurred yesterday between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. She claims she was home alone waiting for her husband to return when you attacked." I allowed a small cold smile to touch my lips. "Between 2 and 4 in the afternoon," I repeated, nodding slowly. "Detectives, my sister has always possessed a very vivid imagination, but her understanding of digital footprints is surprisingly poor." I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a sleek silver USB drive, placing it carefully on the glass surface between us. "What is this?" the detective asked, narrowing his eyes. "This is the end of her emergency protective order," I explained smoothly. "You see, Kiara is still on my cellular family plan. I pay the bill, so I have full administrative access to the account. That drive contains the unalterable GPS location data pinged directly from her phone's satellite receiver during those exact hours yesterday." The detective stared at the small silver drive. "And where does this data show she was?" The second detective asked. his tone shifting slightly. "It shows she was nowhere near that house," I replied. "Yesterday, between 1:30 and 4:45 in the afternoon, Kiara was located across town at the Serenity Lotus Day Spa. Chad had given her a prepaid emergency credit card, and she decided to treat herself to a prenatal massage and a customized facial. I also took the liberty of calling the spa manager this morning. On that drive, you will find a copy of her digitally time-stamped check and signature and the itemized receipt of the services she enjoyed while she was supposedly cowering in fear from my violent attack." I slid the USB drive across the desk until it touched the edge of the detective leather binder. "I believe the penalty for filing a false police report and committing perjury is quite severe," I added casually. The detective stared at the flash drive for a long moment before the taller one reached out and picked it up. He did not say another word about protective orders or domestic terrorism. He simply nodded, tucked the drive into his pocket, and walked out of my office with his partner right behind him. Kiara was about to learn that weaponizing the police against an innocent person carried devastating consequences. But I did not have time to dwell on her impending arrest. I had work to do. I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing the federal evidence packages. By 6 o'clock that evening, I was sitting in my temporary corporate apartment overlooking the city skyline. The doorbell rang sharply. I opened the door to find a man in a plain gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. "Maya Jackson?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "You have been served," he said, pushing the envelope into my hands and walking away down the quiet hallway. I walked back into the living room, sat on the sofa, and opened the envelope. It was a formal petition for divorce, filed by Derek's sleazy new attorney, Marcus Vance. I read through the documents and could not help but laugh out loud at the absolute delusion printed on the pages. Derek was demanding 50% of my federal retirement fund. He wanted full ownership of both luxury vehicles, including the sports car currently locked in valet mode. Most absurdly, he was requesting $15,000 a month in permanent spousal support. The justification for these outrageous demands was listed under a section labeled financial abuse. Marcus Vance had written a compelling narrative painting Derek as a devoted husband who had sacrificed his own lucrative career to support my demanding government job. The paperwork claimed I had maliciously restricted his access to marital funds, leaving him destitute and emotionally traumatized. They thought this thick stack of legal threats would terrify me into submission. They assumed I would take one look at the exorbitant alimony demands and immediately call them begging for a quiet settlement to protect my assets. Right on cue, my cell phone rang. It was Derek. I tapped the accept button and put him on speakerphone. "Did you get the papers, Maya?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogance. He sounded like a man who thought he had just won the lottery. "I did, Derek," I replied calmly, flipping to the last page of the petition. "Good," he said, letting out a condescending sigh. "Look, Maya, I do not want to destroy you in court. Marcus is a shark, and he will drag your name through the mud. He is already drafting a motion to have your federal security clearance reviewed because of the financial abuse allegations. But I am willing to be reasonable. If you unlock my accounts tonight and sign over the deed to the house, we can tear these papers up and do a clean, uncontested divorce. I will even let you keep your retirement fund. Consider it a favor." He was trying to sound generous while actively attempting to extort me. It was a classic manipulation tactic. He was creating a massive imaginary threat so that his real demand, signing over the house and unlocking the stolen money, would seem like a relief. I leaned back against the sofa cushions. "That is a very generous offer, Derek," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "But I think I will take my chances in court." Derek let out a harsh laugh. "You are making a huge mistake, Maya. I filed first. I am controlling the narrative. You are going to lose everything." He hung up the phone, leaving me sitting in the quiet apartment. I set the phone down on the coffee table and picked up the divorce petition again. Derek was right about one thing. He had filed first. But what he and his sleazy lawyer failed to realize was that by rushing to the courthouse to file the initial petition in an at-fault state, he had just triggered the most lethal clause in our prenuptial agreement. Before we got married, my grandfather insisted on a heavily fortified prenuptial agreement. It contained a very specific infidelity and fraud clause. By officially filing for divorce while actively cohabitating with his pregnant mistress, Derek had legally documented his own adultery. Because he initiated the proceedings, his fault was legally locked in. Under the strict terms of our contract, the unfaithful party who initiates the dissolution forfeits absolutely all rights to any marital assets, including real estate vehicles and spousal support. Furthermore, the contract stipulated that the cheating spouse must fully reimburse the innocent party for any marital funds spent on the affair. Derek thought he was digging my grave. He had no idea he had just handed me the shovel to bury him forever. I set the thick divorce petition down on the glass coffee table, feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity. The legal trap was perfectly set, and Derek had walked right into it, completely blind to his own impending destruction. Just as I stood up to finally pour myself a much-needed glass of ice water, my cell phone began to vibrate aggressively against the table. The bright screen illuminated the darkened room with my mother name, Evelyn. I stood there and let it ring 3 times, letting her simmer in her own rising panic, before I finally pressed the green accept button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not even get a single chance to say hello. Maya, what is wrong with you? My mother screamed, her voice shrill and echoing loudly through my quiet apartment. I just had to watch my pregnant daughter sobbing in the driveway of a foreclosed home while the neighbors filmed us. You have gone completely insane. You need to fix this right now. Fix what exactly, Mom? I asked, my voice perfectly level and calm. The fact that my husband was cheating on me with my sister, or the fact that he was laundering my money, neither of those things are my mess to clean up. My mother let out a loud, dramatic scoff, completely dismissing my pain, just like she had done my entire life. Derek is handling his complex business issues, she snapped back quickly. And Kiara made a mistake, but she is your family. You are being horribly petty and vindictive. Now listen to me very carefully, Maya. Kiara is incredibly stressed right now, and it is terrible for the baby. Derek credit cards are useless, and the private hospital just called. They need the $20,000 deposit for the luxury maternity suite by tonight, or she loses her reservation. You are going to wire that money right now. I actually laughed out loud. The genuine sound seemed to shock her into a brief, heavy silence. You want me to pay for the luxury hospital room where your precious daughter will give birth to my cheating husband? Baby? I asked, genuinely amazed by her sheer audacity. You have lost your mind, Evelyn. The answer is absolutely not. My mother voice dropped to a low, venomous hiss that sent a familiar chill down my spine. If you do not wire that money, Maya, I will disown you. You will no longer be my daughter, and I will not stop there. I will go to Pastor Thomas and the entire church congregation this Sunday morning. I will stand at the pulpit and tell everyone exactly what kind of hateful monster you are. I will tell them you are a bitter, jealous, barren woman who threw her own pregnant sister and innocent mother out onto the street out of pure spite. You will be a pariah in this community. No one will ever speak to you again. For 34 years, I had bowed my head and swallowed my pride to keep the peace with this woman. I had let her use me, disrespect me, and cast me aside in favor of Kiara. But the frightened girl she used to bully was dead and gone. Are you finished? I asked coldly. Because now it is my turn to speak. You love to hide behind your fancy church hats and your front row pew mom. You love playing the pious, respectable elder. But you seem to forget exactly what I do for a living. I follow the money. When Derek finances stopped making sense, I investigated yours. The line went dead quiet. All I could hear was her shallow, frightened breathing. How does a retired woman on a fixed income afford a new luxury car? I asked, pacing slowly across my living room. How do you afford to fund Kiara designer wardrobe? The math never added up, Evelyn. So I did a little digging into the specific accounts you manage, specifically the church building fund. You are the head treasurer. Everyone trusts you implicitly. They never thought to question why the new community center is taking 3 years to build with zero actual progress. Maya, what are you talking about? She stammered, her voice suddenly losing all of its arrogant venom. I am talking about the fake invoices, Mom, I said sharply. I am talking about the shell vendor accounts you set up to funnel the church donation money directly into Kiara checking account. You stole over $80,000 from the congregation to maintain the illusion that your golden child was wealthy. You embezzled money from the exact same people you are threatening to expose me to, I informed Pastor Thomas. The church board is auditing the books tomorrow morning. I ended the call before my mother could utter another word. The silence in my apartment was peaceful but brief. Derek and his sleazy attorney, Marcus Vance, were moving fast. By 9 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in a stiff leather chair inside a cold conference room for an emergency deposition. Marcus had filed an emergency motion to depose me, claiming I was an immediate flight risk who was actively hiding marital assets. It was a blatant intimidation tactic designed to force a quick settlement. I sat calmly next to my attorney, Mr. Sterling, a veteran of family law who rarely spoke but missed nothing. Across the table sat Derek, looking unusually confident. And sitting right next to him was Chad. Chad had no legal reason to be there but came to gloat. He leaned back in his chair, spinning a gold pen between his fingers, wearing a sickeningly arrogant smirk. He thought his forged wire transfer documents had perfectly framed me. He thought his offshore accounts were safe from federal eyes. He thought he had won. Marcus Vance started the recording and immediately launched into his aggressive, theatrical questioning. He paced the room, trying to intimidate me. Mrs. Jackson, he barked, leaning over the table. Is it not true that you deliberately locked your husband out of his own checking accounts, causing him severe financial distress? I looked blankly at him, then turned to Mr. Sterling, who gave me a microscopic nod. I faced Marcus. I do not recall, I answered plainly. Marcus frowned, his theatrical momentum slightly disrupted. He tried again. Let the record reflect the witness is being evasive, he announced to the court reporter. Is it not true that you secretly moved hundreds of thousands of dollars into offshore accounts to hide them from the court? Chad stopped spinning his gold pen. He leaned forward eagerly, waiting for me to panic. They wanted me to deny it. They wanted me to passionately defend myself so they could produce their forged documents and trap me. I looked into Chad's cold blue eyes. I have no independent recollection of those transactions. I stated, my voice perfectly flat and entirely devoid of any emotion. Derek let out a loud, exasperated sigh. See, he muttered to Marcus. She is hiding something. Marcus smiled a predatory grin, completely misinterpreting my strategy. He thought I was playing dumb because I was guilty and backed into a corner. He thought my refusal to answer was a sign of weakness. You do not recall, Marcus mocked, pacing back to his seat. You are a forensic auditor for the federal government, Mrs. Jackson. Your entire job is remembering financial details, yet you expect this court to believe you simply forgot about moving massive amounts of marital wealth. I do not recall, I repeated, my tone completely unchanged. Chad actually let out a quiet chuckle. He whispered something to Derek, who grinned broadly. They were so drunk on their own perceived brilliance that they were entirely blind to the trap closing around them. By answering with, I do not recall, I was legally giving them zero sworn testimony to contradict the massive federal indictment that was currently being finalized. I was letting them build their entire defense on an illusion. For 2 agonizing hours, Marcus battered me with questions about bank accounts, properties, and tax records. And for 2 hours, I gave them absolutely nothing. Are you quite finished, Mr. Vance, my attorney? Mr. Sterling finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tense air of the conference room. Because if you are done badgering my client with baseless accusations, we have a document to submit for the record. Marcus scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Submit whatever you want, he sneered confidently. It will not change the fact that your client is refusing to cooperate with a court-ordered deposition. We will be seeking sanctions immediately. Mr. Sterling ignored the threat. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder sealed with bright red tamper-evident tape. It was not a financial ledger or a bank statement. Mr. Sterling did not slide the folder across the table to Marcus or Derek. Instead, he slid it directly to the court reporter sitting quietly at the end of the table. Please mark this as Exhibit A under seal, Mr. Sterling instructed the reporter, and ensure a certified copy is delivered directly to the presiding judge chambers before the preliminary hearing tomorrow morning. Chad smirked, fading slightly, as he stared directly at the sealed red tape. What is in the folder? Marcus demanded, his arrogant tone faltering for the first time. Mr. Sterling simply smiled, stood up, and buttoned his suit jacket. It is my client's formal recollection of events, he replied smoothly. It is my client's formal recollection of events, he replied smoothly. Chad stared at the bright red tamper-evident tape, sealing the thick manila folder. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, the arrogant smirk completely vanished from his face. He looked at me, then looked back at the sealed envelope. His mind was racing, trying to calculate exactly what I could have possibly submitted to a judge under federal seal. He abruptly stood up from the conference table, knocking his chair backward. I have a very important client call to take, he announced, his voice noticeably tighter than it was 5 minutes ago. Without waiting for a response, Chad rushed out of the room, leaving Derek and Marcus Vance staring after him in confusion. The deposition ended shortly. As soon as Chad reached the parking garage, he locked himself inside his luxury sedan and pulled out his encrypted laptop. His hands were shaking violently. He tried to log into his offshore Cayman accounts one more time, praying the federal hold was just a temporary glitch. The screen flashed the exact same terrifying red error message. Access denied, federal hold. But this time, Chad noticed a tiny string of alphanumeric code at the bottom of the error screen. It was an internal routing tag. His blood ran cold. He recognized that specific routing sequence from his days working as a junior analyst. That code did not mean the funds were simply frozen in place. It meant the funds had been actively swept out of the offshore accounts and transferred into a secure government holding trust. Panic consumed him. He knew what was inside that sealed folder now. I had not just frozen their money. I had legally seized it on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service. Chad knew the FBI would be securing federal arrest warrants by tomorrow morning. He had to leave the country immediately. He grabbed his phone and booked a first-class one-way ticket to Dubai. The flight was scheduled to depart from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in exactly 3 hours. He did not bother going home to pack a bag or tell my sister Kiara. He drove recklessly down the interstate, abandoning his car in the short-term parking garage and sprinting toward the international terminal. Chad approached the exclusive first-class check-in counter, sweating profusely in his expensive tailored suit. He slapped his pristine blue passport down on the desk. The ticket agent smiled politely and scanned the document. The computer system immediately emitted a sharp, loud beep. The agent's smile faltered. She typed quickly on her keyboard, frowning at her screen. "Sir, there seems to be a flag on your travel documents," she said quietly. "I need to call a supervisor to clear this up." Chad's heart hammered against his ribs. "There is no flag," he snapped aggressively, trying to project his usual entitled authority. "Just print the boarding pass right now. I'm going to miss my flight." Before the agent could respond, 2 large men wearing tactical vests over plain clothes stepped up behind him. "Customs and Border Protection." "Are you Chad Miller?" the taller man asked, placing a heavy hand on Chad's shoulder. Chad tried to pull away, but the second agent instantly grabbed his other arm, twisting it firmly behind his back. "You are on a federal no-fly list, Mr. Miller," the agent stated loudly as travelers around them stopped to stare. "Your passport has been revoked by order of a federal magistrate. You are being detained for questioning regarding international wire fraud." Chad's legs gave out. The agents practically dragged him through the crowded terminal, pulling him into a small, windowless interrogation room deep inside the airport security office. They confiscated his belongings and ordered him to sit in a metal chair. You are entitled to one phone call before the FBI arrives to formally process your arrest, the agent told him, sliding a standard landline phone across the metal table. Call your attorney. But Chad did not call a defense attorney. He picked up the receiver with trembling hands and dialed Derek's cell phone number. Derek answered on the second ring, sounding thoroughly confused about why Chad had abandoned the deposition. "Derek, you absolute idiot!" Chad screamed into the phone, his voice cracking with sheer hysterical terror. "You ruined my life. I am at the airport and they just detained me. The feds are coming, Derek." Maya did not just freeze the bank accounts. Derek was silent on the other end, completely paralyzed. She swept the accounts. Chad yelled, tears of rage streaming down his face. She redirected every single dollar of the stolen funds straight to an Internal Revenue Service holding account. "She has everything, and they are coming for you next." The line went dead. Derek stood frozen in the cold center of the conference room, his cell phone pressed tightly against his ear. The panicked words Chad had just screamed echoed in his mind. "She has everything and they are coming for you next." Derek slowly lowered the phone, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped the device. The false bravado he had paraded around with for the past 2 days evaporated. He was not a brilliant mastermind. He was a pawn who had just been expertly outplayed by his own wife. He stumbled out of the conference room, ignoring the receptionist, and rushed to the elevators. He had to get back to his rented office space immediately. The drive across town was a blur. He ran every red light, checking his rearview mirror for police sirens. When he burst through the doors of his empty corporate suite, his breathing was ragged. He slammed the wooden door behind him and locked the deadbolt. He ran to his desk, sweeping disorganized paperwork onto the floor until he found his secure laptop. He flipped the screen open, his heart pounding furiously. Chad thought he was the only one hiding money, but Derek had been secretly skimming off their fraudulent investments for months. He had quietly funneled over $400,000 into an anonymous offshore cryptocurrency wallet. It was his ultimate safety net, his secret escape fund. Derek felt a frantic glimmer of hope. If he could just access that crypto wallet, he could transfer the funds, buy a fake passport, and flee the country before federal agents arrived. He typed in the long, complicated password to access the hidden drive on his laptop. He opened the digital vault and clicked on the exchange application. The loading screen seemed to take an absolute eternity. Derek wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, muttering a desperate prayer. He just needed this single account to remain safe. He pulled out a small black notebook and carefully typed in the 24-word seed phrase required to unlock the encrypted wallet. He pressed enter. The digital vault unlocked. The screen refreshed, displaying his dashboard. Derek stopped breathing. He leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes wide with absolute horror. The total balance displayed in bright, bold numbers at the top of the screen was exactly 0. Every single digital coin was gone. His secret safety net had been completely wiped clean. Derek frantically clicked the refresh button over and over again, slamming his finger against the mouse pad. 0, 0, 0. It was impossible. No one knew the seed phrase. He never written it down anywhere except the black notebook locked in a biometric safe. Then he saw it. Under the recent transaction history, there was a single outgoing transfer executed at 4 in the morning, the exact night he had been kicked out of the house. The transfer had emptied the entire wallet in one single sweeping motion. Attached to the digital transaction was a customized text note. Derek moved his cursor and clicked on the note. A small pop-up window appeared in the center of the high-definition screen containing exactly 4 words. Marital asset reclaimed Maya. A guttural scream tore from Derek's throat. He grabbed the heavy laptop and hurled it across the office. It smashed violently into the drywall, shattering into pieces. She knew everything. While he was parading around spending her money and sleeping with her sister, she had been quietly dismantling his digital life piece by piece. She legally seized his stolen crypto stash before he even knew they were at war. He collapsed into his leather chair, pulling his hair in sheer desperation. He was completely broke. He had no cash, no credit cards, no house, and no secret funds. He was a federal criminal waiting to be arrested. Suddenly, heavy pounding echoed from the locked office door. Derek jumped out of his chair, his eyes darting toward the exit. Kiara's voice cried out from the hallway, sounding completely hysterical. He slowly walked over and unlocked the deadbolt. Kiara pushed her way inside, her face stained with tears. "Derek, my cards are declining," she sobbed, clutching her purse. "The hospital canceled my maternity reservation. What is going on?" Derek stared at his pregnant mistress, feeling nothing but blinding resentment. He opened his mouth to tell her that they were both going to federal prison, but his cell phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. He pulled it out, hoping for a miracle. It was a text message from his sleazy defense attorney, Marcus Vance. Derek opened the message. It read, "I am dropping you as a client. Do not contact me again. The FBI just raided my office for your files. The FBI just raided my office for your files." That single text message shattered whatever hope Derek had left. The next morning, the heavy wooden doors of the Fulton County Family Court swung open. It was day 3, and the air inside the courthouse was thick with anticipation. I walked down the center aisle wearing a tailored charcoal suit projecting absolute calm. My attorney, Mr. Sterling, walked beside me holding a slim leather briefcase. The gallery was unusually packed. Word of our dramatic fallout had spread through our neighborhood and the church congregation overnight. Sitting in the front row of the gallery were my mother Evelyn and my sister Kiara. They had spent the morning getting ready for what they believed would be my ultimate public humiliation. Kiara was draped in a designer maternity dress that I had unknowingly paid for, her hair perfectly styled. My mother sat beside her wearing her finest Sunday church hat and a smug expression. They whispered to each other, pointing at me and letting out quiet, condescending laughs. They were fully expecting the judge to strip me of my wealth and hand my estate directly over to Derek and Kiara. But the man who finally walked through the side doors did not look like a victorious conqueror. Derek looked completely destroyed. He was wearing the same torn suit from his physical altercation with Chad the day before. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands trembled as he took his seat at the petitioner table. He looked over at Kiara and my mother, but he did not smile. He just stared at them with a hollow, terrified expression. Sitting next to Derek was a young, overworked public defender. Since Marcus Vance had abruptly dropped him and fled, Derek had no choice but to accept court-appointed counsel. The young lawyer looked exhausted, flipping frantically through a massive stack of disorganized papers Derek had shoved into his hands just moments before the hearing. "All rise," the bailiff announced loudly. "The Honorable Judge Harrison presiding." Judge Harrison took her seat at the high mahogany bench. She was a no-nonsense magistrate known for her sharp intellect and absolute intolerance for perjury. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the chaotic petitioner table. "Counsel, are we ready to proceed with the preliminary asset allocation?" Judge Harrison asked, her tone clipped and professional. The young public defender stood up, straightening his tie. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied nervously. "My client has filed an emergency motion to unlock all marital bank accounts currently frozen by the respondent. We assert that the respondent, Maya Jackson, has committed gross financial abuse. Furthermore, we have documentary evidence proving that the respondent has been secretly embezzling marital funds into offshore accounts to hide them from this court." A loud gasp echoed from the gallery. My mother Evelyn nodded vigorously, patting Kiara on the knee. They thought this was the moment I would be destroyed. Mr. Sterling did not object. He simply sat back in his chair and waited. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Embezzlement is a very serious accusation, counselor," she warned. "You better have rock-solid proof if you are bringing those claims into my courtroom." "We do, Your Honor," the public defender stated confidently, completely unaware of the radioactive material he was handling. He picked up the stack of wire transfer authorization forms that Derek and Chad had frantically forged the day before. "These are the physical authorization forms bearing the respondent's exact signature," They explicitly direct the transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Cayman Islands. We request these be entered into the official court record as Exhibit A." The bailiff walked over, took the forged documents from the public defender, and handed them up to the judge. Derek closed his eyes tightly, gripping the edge of the wooden table. He knew those signatures were fake, but he was completely out of options. He was praying the judge would take them at face value and order the accounts unfrozen before the FBI closed in. Judge Harrison put on her reading glasses. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. Even my mother stopped whispering. The judge carefully turned the first page. She looked at the signature. Then she turned to the second page. She spent a very long, agonizingly quiet minute carefully reviewing the forms. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, Judge Harrison slowly lowered the papers to her desk. She took off her glasses. She did not look at me. She did not look at my attorney. She turned her head slowly and looked directly down at the terrified Derek. Her expression was not one of curiosity or standard judicial neutrality. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disgust that chilled him to the absolute bone. "Counselor, are you submitting these documents as authentic evidence?" Judge Harrison asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. The young public defender swallowed hard, looking small in his oversized suit. "Yes, Your Honor," he squeaked. "My client assures me they are legitimate." Judge Harrison leaned forward, holding the papers up. "These documents are freshly printed on commercial paper, but dated 6 months ago. The signature on these pages does not match any sworn affidavits previously filed by the respondent. In fact, it looks like a crude forgery. If your client fabricated documents to deceive this court, I will have him held in contempt and referred for criminal prosecution." Derek turned a sickly shade of gray. He slumped down in his chair, looking like a man standing on the gallows. He had underestimated the sharp intellect of the judge. The public defender scrambled to withdraw the documents, but the damage to Derek's credibility was already catastrophic. It was at this exact moment that my attorney, Mr. Sterling, finally stood up. He buttoned his jacket and cleared his throat, demanding the complete attention of the room. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling began, his deep voice echoing in the quiet courtroom. "We are not here to debate fabricated wire transfers or fictitious embezzlement plots. The petitioner has filed for a dissolution of marriage and is seeking half of my client assets. We respectfully request that the court review the foundational document governing this union." Mr. Sterling opened his slim leather briefcase and retrieved a crisp, thick stack of legal paper bound with a navy blue ribbon. He walked confidently to the bench and handed the document to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I present the original notarized prenuptial agreement executed by both parties exactly 5 years ago," Mr. Sterling announced. Derek's head snapped up. His eyes darted wildly. He had completely forgotten about the prenuptial agreement my grandfather had forced him to sign. He had always assumed it was just a standard contract protecting my retirement fund. He was about to learn how incredibly thorough my grandfather really was. Judge Harrison took the document and adjusted her glasses, flipping to the highlighted section Mr. Sterling indicated. As the court will see on page 12 under Section 4, Paragraph B, there is a very strict infidelity and fraud clause. Mr. Sterling explained, pacing slowly in front of the petitioner table. The clause explicitly states that if either party engages in an extramarital affair and subsequently initiates divorce proceedings, the unfaithful party automatically forfeits any and all claims to marital assets. This includes all real estate, all investment portfolios, all vehicles, and any claim to spousal support. My mother, Evelyn, gasped loudly from the front row of the gallery. Kiara clutched her designer maternity dress, her jaw dropping open in sheer disbelief. Derek stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "That is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "You cannot enforce that. She kicked me out of the house. I had no choice but to file." Judge Harrison slammed her gavel down with a sharp crack. "Sit down immediately, Mr. Jackson," she ordered, her eyes flashing with anger. Derek slowly sank back into his chair, defeated. Mr. Sterling continued, ignoring the outburst completely. Your Honor, the petitioner willfully filed for divorce in an at-fault state while actively cohabitating with a pregnant woman who is not his wife. By initiating this dissolution, he legally activated the penalty clause of the prenuptial agreement. He has effectively completely disinherited himself from the marital estate. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Derek was losing the house, the cars, and the massive alimony he had arrogantly demanded just 24 hours ago. But Mr. Sterling was not finished. He turned to face Derek directly. Furthermore, Your Honor, the contract contains a restitution mandate, Mr. Sterling added, his voice cutting through the air like a surgical scalpel. It requires the unfaithful party to fully reimburse the innocent spouse for any marital funds expended to facilitate the affair. As a forensic data auditor, my client has meticulously tracked every single dollar the petitioner spent on his mistress over the last 2 years. This includes luxury vacations, designer clothing, expensive jewelry, and the lease on a secret apartment. Mr. Sterling pulled a single sheet of paper from his pocket and handed it to the young public defender, who looked like he wanted to vanish into thin air. We have submitted the forensic accounting ledger to the court, Mr. Sterling concluded, turning back to the judge. Per the legally binding terms of the prenuptial agreement, he signed Mr. Derek Jackson, forfeits all marital property, and currently owes my client a massive debt. The total debt Derek owes Maya for funding his illicit lifestyle is exactly $1.8 million. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos following Mr. Sterling's declaration. Derek buried his face in his hands, letting out a muffled sob. But the judge was not finished. She slammed her gavel until silence fell over the room. Mr. Sterling, you have presented a massive financial claim, Judge Harrison said. If your client is asserting that $1.8 million was misappropriated, I need to see the exact forensic breakdown of how that money was moved. Mr. Sterling nodded respectfully. Your Honor, we are fully prepared to demonstrate the complete financial web, he replied. I would like to call Maya Jackson to the stand. I stood up from the table and walked calmly to the witness stand. I placed my right hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The bailiff wheeled out a large digital display board, positioning it directly in front of the judge bench. Mr. Sterling handed me a laser pointer. For the next 45 minutes, the courtroom became my personal classroom. I clicked a button and a massive flowchart illuminated the screen. I did not sound angry or vindictive. I sounded exactly like what I was, a federal forensic auditor, presenting a meticulously researched case. Your Honor, the petitioner, Derek Jackson, claimed to be a successful commercial real estate investor. I began aiming the laser dot at the top of the flowchart. However, his investment fund was nothing more than a shell game. Whenever my personal income or my family generational wealth was deposited into our joint accounts, Derek would transfer it out, disguised as corporate investments. I clicked the remote, and a series of red arrows traced the money from our bank to a holding company managed by his brother-in-law, Chad Miller. Derek flinched in his chair as Chad's name was read into the official court record. Chad Miller utilized his legitimate brokerage license to wash the stolen funds, I continued. He funneled the money through 3 temporary holding accounts to obscure the original source. From there, the money was wired directly to an offshore banking institution in the Cayman Islands, bypassing United States tax regulations. This structure was designed to commit federal wire fraud and tax evasion. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the complex web. Mrs. Jackson, she asked, if your husband and his brother-in-law were moving millions of dollars offshore, they would need a clean corporate entity to authorize those transfers. Neither of those men could use their own names without triggering immediate federal flags. Who signed the incorporation documents for these shell companies? I turned off the laser pointer and placed it gently on the railing of the witness stand. I looked directly into the gallery, locking eyes with my sister Kiara. She was no longer whispering. Her face had turned a pale white. That is the most tragic part of this criminal enterprise, Your Honor, I said. They knew they needed a clean, untraceable identity. So Derek and Chad convinced a third party to act as the primary corporate signatory. They used someone who trusted them completely and who eagerly wanted the illusion of wealth without doing any of the actual work. I pulled a single document from the folder on my lap and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, I present the official articles of incorporation for the primary offshore shell company I announced. The sole managing director listed on those documents, the person legally responsible for authorizing every single fraudulent wire transfer, is Kiara Wilson. The air in the courtroom instantly vanished. Kiara let out a high-pitched gasp, grabbing her throat. Judge Harrison reviewed the document, her expression turning incredibly grim. Let the record reflect that Kiara Wilson is actively listed as the primary signatory, she stated firmly. Because she signed these federal documents, she is no longer just an innocent bystander. She is legally classified as the primary accessory to massive international wire fraud and felony tax evasion. She is facing the exact same mandatory federal prison sentences as the principal architects of this scheme. A guttural, agonizing scream tore through the gallery. Kiara clutched her pregnant stomach, her eyes rolling back into her head. She collapsed forward, tumbling out of the wooden pew and hitting the carpeted floor in a dead faint. Total pandemonium erupted. Bailiffs rushed down the aisle, calling for medical assistance. My mother, Evelyn, leaped out of her seat, but she did not bend down to help her unconscious golden child. Evelyn looked wildly around the room, realizing her own complicity in the church embezzlement was about to be exposed next. Panic completely hijacked her brain. She grabbed her purse, abandoned her daughter, and sprinted desperately toward the heavy wooden exit doors, trying to flee the courtroom. Evelyn did not even make it halfway down the center aisle. Just as her hand reached out to push open the heavy wooden exit doors, they swung inward with massive force. My mother stumbled backward, dropping her designer purse, spilling her stolen church funds across the courthouse floor. Standing in the doorway, blocking her escape, were 5 federal officers wearing dark windbreakers. The bright yellow letters on the backs of their jackets read, FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The courtroom, which had been engulfed in total chaos just seconds earlier, went deathly quiet. Even the bailiffs tending to Kiara stopped moving. The lead FBI agent stepped past my trembling mother, completely ignoring her. He was a tall, imposing man with a stern face. Right behind him, 2 armed agents were dragging a very familiar figure into the courtroom. It was Chad. He was no longer wearing his pristine tailored suit or his arrogant smirk. He was wearing wrinkled travel clothes, his hands firmly cuffed behind his back. His face was stained with fresh tears, and he looked completely broken. The agents had brought him directly from the airport holding cell to the family court, knowing Derek would be sitting right here. Judge Harrison did not look surprised. She simply crossed her arms and watched the scene unfold. She had received the certified sealed folder from my attorney earlier that morning, and she knew exactly why the federal government was interrupting her docket. The lead agent walked purposefully down the center aisle, bypassing the gallery, bypassing the witness stand where I sat, and marched straight over to the petitioner table. Derek was frozen in his chair. He looked like a man watching a massive tidal wave about to crash directly on top of him. Derek Jackson, the lead FBI agent, announced, his deep voice echoing in the dead silent room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit international wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. Derek did not run. He did not fight. He simply sat there, paralyzed by the absolute destruction of his fake life. The agent grabbed Derek by the arm, hauling him to his feet. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, the agent ordered. Derek slowly turned around. The harsh metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed sharply through the quiet courtroom. It was the exact sound of total defeat. They pushed Derek forward until he was standing shoulder to shoulder with Chad. The 2 masterminds, the 2 arrogant men who thought they could effortlessly steal my wealth and ruin my life, were now standing before a judge in matching silver bracelets, facing decades in federal prison. Chad could not stop crying. He was sobbing loudly, his chest heaving as he realized he would never see his luxury office or his offshore millions again. He looked at Derek with pure hatred, but he did not have the strength to say a single word. Derek was entirely focused on me. As the federal agents began to lead them away, Derek dug his heels into the carpet, refusing to walk. He twisted his body around, looking desperately at the witness stand where I was still sitting calmly with my hands folded in my lap. "Maya, please," Derek begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "Tell them it is a mistake, Maya. Tell them we can work this out. I will give you everything back. I will sign the divorce papers. Please do not let them take me away." He was actually crying now, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the woman he had betrayed, humiliated, and tried to destroy. He was begging for the exact same mercy he had completely refused to show me 3 days ago at that restaurant. I looked at the man I used to love. I looked at the pathetic fraud standing in front of me, begging for his life. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at him with the cold, detached professionalism of an auditor who had just balanced a very complicated ledger. The debt was finally settled completely. I remained completely silent, watching the consequences of his own arrogance finally catch up to him in the most devastating way possible on this terrible morning. The federal agents shoved Derek forward aggressively, forcing him to walk down the center aisle toward the heavy exit doors. He stumbled slightly, his shoulders slumped entirely forward. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind them, leaving behind nothing but the quiet reality of their absolute ruin. The harsh, sharp sound of the steel handcuffs clicking together constantly as they slowly walked down the marble hallway echoed softly through the silence, fading steadily away into the cold, empty distance. It took Kiara almost 10 minutes to fully regain consciousness on the courtroom floor. When she finally opened her eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights above her made her head pound furiously. A female bailiff was holding a cup of water out to her, but the gallery was entirely empty. My mother, Evelyn, was nowhere to be found. The heavy realization of what had just happened crashed down on Kiara all over again, crushing the breath right out of her lungs. The judge had explicitly stated that her signature on the offshore incorporation documents made her the primary accessory to federal wire fraud. She was facing a mandatory 10-year prison sentence. Panic completely hijacked her system. She pushed the cup of water away, scrambled ungracefully to her feet, and rushed out of the courthouse. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, Kiara found herself sitting in the cold, sterile lobby of the United States Attorney Office in downtown Atlanta. She had driven straight there, desperate to secure a deal before Derek or Chad could point the finger at her. She was ushered into a small conference room where a stern federal prosecutor and the same lead FBI agent who had arrested her husband and lover were waiting. Kiara immediately collapsed into a leather chair and started sobbing uncontrollably. She placed her hands on her pregnant stomach, playing the ultimate victim card. "Listen to me, please," Kiara begged the prosecutor, tears streaming down her carefully contoured face. "I did not know what they were doing, I swear to you. Derek manipulated me into signing those papers. He told me it was just a standard tax document for a new real estate venture. I am pregnant with his child, and he used me. If you grant me full immunity, I will turn state's evidence right now. I will testify against Derek and Chad in front of a grand jury. I will tell you everything you need to know about how they moved the money." The federal prosecutor did not offer her a tissue. He did not look sympathetic. He simply opened a thick white binder resting on the table in front of him and calmly flipped through the first few pages. "Miss Wilson," the prosecutor began, his voice entirely devoid of any warmth, "we appreciate your sudden willingness to cooperate with the federal government. However, we are going to decline your offer for immunity." Kiara stopped crying, her mouth dropping open in sheer disbelief. Why, she demanded, her voice rising in panic. "I am offering you the entire criminal operation on a silver platter. I can put them away for years." The FBI agent standing in the corner of the room let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Miss Wilson," the agent said, stepping forward, "we already have the entire operation on a silver platter. Your sister Maya Jackson provided us with a flawless, meticulously documented forensic ledger. She gave us the bank routing numbers, the shell company registration files, the offshore account access logs, and crystal clear high-definition video footage of Derek and Chad actively forging wire transfer documents yesterday afternoon. We have absolutely everything we need to secure multiple federal convictions. Your testimony is entirely worthless to us. The prosecutor closed the white binder and folded his hands. Ignorance of the law is not a valid legal defense, Miss Wilson, he explained coldly. You eagerly signed your name to international corporate documents so you could live a life of luxury funded by stolen money. You enjoyed the benefits of the fraud, and now you will share the consequences. The grand jury convenes next Tuesday. You will be formally indicted on 3 counts of accessory to wire fraud and money laundering. I strongly suggest you spend whatever time you have left finding a very good criminal defense attorney. Kiara was escorted out of the federal building by armed security guards. She stumbled out onto the busy downtown sidewalk completely destitute. She had no money, no credit cards, and the luxury maternity suite reservation was gone. She was going to give birth in a state facility before serving a decade in a federal penitentiary. Desperate, terrified, and completely alone, she pulled out her cell phone. Her hands shook violently as she dialed my mother number, praying Evelyn had somehow managed to access her retirement savings to hire a lawyer. The phone rang 4 times. Finally, someone answered, but it was not Evelyn. "Hello," Kiara said, her voice trembling. "Mom, I need you right now. They are going to indict me. I need money for a lawyer." A deep, unfamiliar male voice responded on the other end of the line. "This is Detective Miller with the Atlanta Police Department Financial Crimes Unit," the voice stated firmly. "Evelyn Jackson is currently unable to come to the phone. She is in an active interrogation room regarding the theft of $80,000 from the First Baptist Church Building Fund. If you are a relative, you will need to contact the precinct to arrange her bail." The line went dead. Kiara stood on the hot Atlanta sidewalk, holding her phone, listening to the dial tone as her entire world collapsed. She had no mother to save her, no husband to fund her, and no sister to forgive her. But miles away from that busy sidewalk, an even harsher reality was unfolding inside the cold concrete walls of the federal holding facility. Derek and Chad had been stripped of their designer suits, forced into scratchy orange jumpsuits, and placed together in a temporary holding cell while they waited for their initial bail hearing. The tiny, windowless room smelled of bleach and stale sweat. Derek sat on the edge of the metal bench, staring blankly at the concrete floor. His mind was still spinning from the courtroom disaster. He could not comprehend how fast everything had unraveled. Chad was not sitting down. He was pacing furiously back and forth across the small cell, his expensive leather dress shoes tapping sharply against the concrete. The arrogant, confident real estate broker was completely gone, replaced by a cornered, frantic animal. He suddenly stopped pacing and turned toward Derek, his face contorted with pure hatred. "This is all your fault," Chad spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You and your psychotic wife. I should have never gotten involved with you people." Derek looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You came to me, Chad," Derek replied, his voice hoarse. "You are the one who set up the offshore accounts. You are the one who told me we could use Kiara's name to hide the money. Do not you dare try to put this on me," Chad yelled, taking a threatening step forward. "I was running a highly successful, legitimate investment firm before you dragged your ghetto family drama into my office. You were nothing but a broke, pathetic loser living off your wife's money. I tried to elevate you. I tried to teach you how real businessmen operate, but you could not shake that hood mentality. You are just a street thug wearing a custom suit. You ruined my life, you ignorant animal." The racial slurs and the absolute contempt in Chad's voice hung heavily in the cold air of the holding cell. Derek stared at the man he had idolized, the man he had considered a mentor and a brother. For 2 years, Derek had bent over backward to impress Chad. He had stolen from his own wife to prove he belonged in Chad's exclusive country club world. He had convinced himself that Chad respected him. But looking into Chad's cold blue eyes, Derek finally saw the ugly truth. Chad never saw him as an equal or a partner. Chad saw him as a convenient scapegoat, a disposable black man to take the fall if the federal government ever came knocking. The crushing weight of his own stupidity hit Derek like a physical blow. He slowly lowered his head, burying his face in his hands. A sickening wave of nausea washed over him as the reality of his choices finally settled into his bones. He had possessed everything a man could possibly want. He was married to Maya, a brilliant, beautiful, loyal, and incredibly successful woman who loved him unconditionally. She had provided him with a gorgeous home, financial stability, and unwavering support. She had given him the keys to a magnificent kingdom. And what had he done with it? He had thrown his exceptional wife away for a cheap illusion. He had traded her for a racist white man who actively despised him. He had traded her for a shallow, gold-digging mistress who only wanted him for the designer bags and the luxury vacations he could illegally buy her. He had traded real love and security for a family of toxic, greedy parasites who turned on him the exact second the money stopped flowing. He was not a visionary entrepreneur. He was the biggest fool on the planet. Before Derek could say another word, the heavy steel door of the holding cell clattered open. 2 armed federal marshals stepped inside holding thick metal chains. "Time to go," a marshal barked. "The magistrate judge is ready for your initial appearance." They shackled Derek and Chad, binding their wrists to their waists and their ankles together. The marshals marched them down a long, brightly lit corridor and into a cold federal courtroom. Judge Thomas, a stern magistrate, reviewed the thick case file resting on his wooden bench. The federal prosecutor stood up immediately and argued aggressively against granting any bail. "Your Honor, both men represent extreme flight risks," the prosecutor stated. "They were caught fleeing and actively forging federal documents." The judge did not hesitate to rule. "Bail is completely denied," he declared loudly. "You are remanded to county jail. You are remanded to county jail." The heavy slam of the magistrate gavel sealed their immediate future, locking them behind bars. Meanwhile, miles away, Kiara was still standing on the blistering hot pavement outside the federal building. She had no money, no car, and now absolutely no family to rescue her. Desperation clawed at her throat. She managed to beg a passing city bus driver to let her board for free, weeping hysterically about her pregnancy to gain his sympathy. The bumpy hour-long bus ride back to the upscale suburban neighborhood gave her plenty of time to formulate a pathetic backup plan. She figured she could just go back to my house, pack up all her expensive designer clothes, her diamond jewelry, and her massive collection of imported luxury handbags. She planned to pawn everything immediately to afford a cheap motel room and a consultation with a criminal defense attorney. She stepped off the bus and walked the final 6 blocks to the house, her designer heels blistering her tired feet. But as she rounded the corner and my beautiful $1.2 million estate came into view, her grand survival plan evaporated into thin air. The massive mahogany front door was covered in bright yellow federal foreclosure tape. A heavy steel padlock had been violently installed directly over the custom brass handle, ensuring nobody could enter. But that was not what made Kiara drop to her knees on the concrete sidewalk. Scattered aggressively across the perfectly manicured front lawn were dozens of cheap, thin black plastic garbage bags. Some of the bags had ripped open, spilling her custom maternity dresses, her expensive makeup palettes, and her imported silk bed sheets directly onto the damp grass. The federal authorities had officially executed the eviction notice, wiping the house completely clean. Kiara scrambled up from the pavement and sprinted onto the lawn, tearing into the plastic garbage bags like a rabid animal. She frantically dug through the piles of her discarded life, her perfectly styled hair falling into a tangled, messy nest. She tossed aside sweaters and shoes, desperately searching for the one thing that could actually save her right now: her handbags. She owned a private collection of luxury purses worth over $80,000. If she could just find those expensive leather bags, she could survive this disaster. As she ripped open the fifth garbage bag, a sudden bright flash of light caught her eye. She looked up and froze in place. Standing directly at the edge of the property line were at least 6 of my affluent neighbors. They were not stepping forward offering to help her. They were holding their expensive smartphones up, recording every single humiliating second of her frantic garbage digging. Just yesterday, Kiara had been broadcasting a live video to her thousands of followers, bragging about her magnificent new mansion and her incredibly wealthy lifestyle. Today, she was the main attraction of a viral neighborhood spectacle. The golden child, the beautiful internet influencer, was literally rolling in the trash. "Stop recording me!" she shrieked hysterically, throwing a dirty designer shoe at the closest neighbor. "You are invading my privacy! Get away from my house right now!" The neighbors did not move an inch. One of the older women simply lowered her phone and scoffed loudly at her. "It is not your house, honey," the woman called out mockingly. "The sheriff deputies said the real owner kicked you out. You should smile for the camera so your fans can see how you actually live." Kiara burst into tears of pure humiliation, shielding her face with her shaking hands. She abandoned the torn garbage bags and crawled toward a small cardboard box sitting near the front porch stairs, hoping her jewelry was secretly hidden inside. She ripped the thick tape off the box and pulled back the cardboard flaps. The box was entirely empty, except for a single piece of heavy white cardstock resting at the absolute bottom. She picked it up, her hands shaking violently. It was an official asset seizure notification directly from the Internal Revenue Service. Kiara read the cold clinical text printed on the paper, and her heart stopped completely. The document explicitly stated that all high-value personal property located inside the residence, including all designer handbags, all imported jewelry, and all luxury electronics, had been legally confiscated by the federal government. Because her name was on the corporate shell company documents, she was legally liable for the stolen funds. The federal agents had cataloged and seized every single expensive item she owned to be publicly auctioned off to pay for the massive federal back taxes Derek owed. Kiara realized her designer bags were sold to pay the Internal Revenue Service back taxes, leaving her with absolutely nothing left. While Kiara sat weeping on the manicured lawn of the locked estate, my own afternoon was completely serene. I was sitting on the velvet sofa in my high-security corporate apartment, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in brilliant shades of orange and pink. My laptop was closed. The federal evidence had been completely transferred. My part in the criminal investigation was officially over. I poured myself a steaming cup of chamomile tea and took a slow, deep breath, finally feeling the crushing weight of the past 5 years lift from my shoulders. Then the silence was broken by the sharp buzzing of my cell phone resting on the glass coffee table. The caller identification displayed my mother name. I knew this call was coming. I let it ring 4 times, savoring the control I now held before calmly picking up the device and pressing accept. I did not say hello. I simply listened to the frantic, heavy breathing echoing through the speaker. "Maya, you have to help me right now." Evelyn sobbed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. It was the first time in my entire life I had ever heard my mother sound genuinely terrified. "They fired me, Maya. Pastor Thomas called an emergency meeting of the church board, and they terminated my position as treasurer. The police detectives kept me in an interrogation room for 4 grueling hours. They are threatening to file felony embezzlement charges if I do not pay back the $80,000 by Friday morning. You have to wire me the money, Maya. Please. You are the only one who has that kind of cash. You have to save me." I took a slow sip of my tea, feeling absolutely nothing for the desperate woman on the other end of the line. "You stole money from a church congregation, Evelyn." I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. "You abused the trust of your community to buy designer clothes and luxury vacations for your favorite daughter." Why should I pay for your crimes? Because I am your mother. Evelyn shrieked, her panic quickly morphing into the familiar toxic entitlement she had used to control me for decades. I brought you into this world, Maya. I raised you. I sacrificed my youth and my energy to give you a life. You owe me. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood when they need you the most. A strong black woman protects her family. The sheer audacity of her guilt trip was almost poetic. She was still trying to use the exact same manipulative scripts that had kept me trapped for 34 years. But those words held absolutely no power over me anymore. "Let us talk about your sacrifices, Evelyn," I replied, my tone dropping to a chillingly cold whisper. "Let us review exactly how you protected this family. When I was 18 years old, you forced me to take out massive student loans so you could drain my college savings account to buy Kiara a brand new sports car for her high school graduation. When Derek and I bought our first home, you refused to attend the housewarming party because you said it would make Kiara feel bad about living in an apartment. When Kiara purposely threw a glass of red wine all over my $4,000 anniversary dress, you sat at the table and demanded I apologize to her." "Maya, that is not fair," Evelyn stammered, trying to interrupt. "I am not finished." I snapped, my voice slicing through her pathetic defense. "When you found out my husband was sleeping with your golden child, you did not comfort me. You did not protect me. You proudly watched Kiara parade around wearing my grandmother pearls and carrying my husband baby. You actively helped him steal from me. You handed him the deed to my grandfather legacy just to fund their affair. You chose her every single time, Evelyn. You made your choice, and now you are going to live with the consequences of it." "Maya, please, Evelyn," begged, her voice reducing to a pathetic whimper. "I have nothing left. Chad is in jail. Derek is in jail. Kiara is broke and homeless. I am your mother. You cannot do this to me. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" "You can go wherever you want, Evelyn," I said calmly, "but you will never come near me again. My attorney filed a formal cease and desist order against you this afternoon. You are legally barred from contacting me, approaching my residence, or my place of employment. If you attempt to reach out to me again, I will immediately have you arrested for harassment. Have a nice life, Evelyn." I did not wait for her to respond. I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button to end the call, and permanently blocked her phone number. Miles away, Evelyn lowered her cell phone from her ear, her hands shaking violently as she listened to the dead dial tone. She was standing in the center of her dark, empty living room. The bank had arrived an hour earlier to serve her with official foreclosure eviction papers. In a desperate final attempt to hide her church embezzlement before the audit, she had illegally taken out a massive fraudulent loan against her own house. Now the bank was seizing the property. Evelyn looked around the cold, empty house. The golden child was gone. The stolen money was gone. She was completely, utterly alone, standing in the dark of her foreclosed home, waiting for the police to arrive. As the sun completely dipped below the Atlanta skyline, casting long, dark shadows across the city, I finally allowed myself to truly relax. It was exactly 72 hours since that disastrous dinner at Belmont's. 3 days ago, I was sitting in a restaurant booth covered in red wine, listening to my husband demand a divorce while my family laughed at my humiliation. Tonight, I was standing in the expansive living room of my new, highly secure, corporate downtown penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering city, a city that no longer contained the toxic parasites who had spent years trying to drain me dry. The silence of my sanctuary was suddenly interrupted by the harsh ringing of my cell phone. I glanced at the screen. It was an automated message indicating an incoming collect call from the Fulton County Jail. I considered ignoring it, letting him rot in his own silence, but a small part of me wanted to hear the final pathetic chapter of his downfall. I pressed the accept button and placed the phone on the sleek marble kitchen island, activating the speakerphone. An automated voice prompted me to accept the charges. I did. Maya Derek voice cracked through the speaker immediately. He sounded absolutely terrible. His voice was raw, scratchy, and thick with uncontrollable sobbing. "Please, Maya, do not hang up on me. You are the only person I have left. They put me in a cell with 20 other men. It is freezing in here and I am terrified. Please, you have to help me get out of here." I poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the marble counter. "I thought you had a brilliant legal strategy, Derek," I said, my tone completely flat. "I thought you and Chad were going to destroy me in court. What happened to controlling the narrative?" A loud, wretched sob echoed through the phone line. "I was stupid," he wailed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of his holding block. "I was so incredibly stupid, Maya. You have to believe me, I never wanted any of this. Chad manipulated me. He told me it was just a smart business tax shelter. I did not understand the federal laws. And Kiara, she threw herself at me. She made me feel important when I was struggling with my career. They used me, Maya. They preyed on my insecurities. I am not a criminal mastermind, you know that. I am just a guy who made a terrible mistake. Please find it in your heart to forgive me. I will do anything you want. Just call the prosecutor and tell them to drop the charges." I let his pathetic excuses hang in the empty air of my penthouse. He was still refusing to take actual accountability. Even facing a decade in federal prison, he was desperately trying to play the victim, blaming the white man who mentored him and the younger sister who stroked his ego. Before I could even formulate a response to his cowardly begging, a sudden violent pounding echoed from the front of my penthouse. I picked up my phone, leaving Derek on speaker, and walked slowly toward the private entryway. My penthouse featured a secure private elevator that opened into a reinforced glass vestibule. Anyone who managed to tailgate a resident into the lobby elevator could ride it up, but they could not bypass the bulletproof glass doors separating the vestibule from my actual living space. Standing on the other side of that thick glass was Kiara. She looked absolutely deranged. Her designer maternity dress was stained with dirt from her frantic garbage digging. Her hair was a tangled, matted mess, and her mascara was smeared heavily down her cheeks, leaving dark black streaks across her pale face. She slammed her fists against the heavy glass, sobbing hysterically. "Maya, please," she screamed, her voice muffled but audible through the thick security barrier. "Maya, I know you are in there. Please open the door. The police are looking for Mom and they locked me out of the house. I have nowhere to go, Maya. You have to give me money for a lawyer. They are going to put me in prison and I am having a baby. You cannot let your own niece or nephew be born in a jail cell. Please, Maya, I am begging you." Derek heard the muffled screaming through the phone. "Is that Kiara?" he asked, his voice trembling with a fresh wave of panic. "Maya, what is happening? Where is she?" "She is standing right outside my door, Derek," I replied calmly. "She is begging for the exact same salvation you are currently begging for. You two really are perfect for each other." I walked over to my custom wine refrigerator and pulled out a very specific bottle. It was a rare, expensive vintage red wine, the exact same vintage we were drinking at Belmont's 3 days ago. I pulled the cork and poured a generous amount into a large crystal goblet. I walked back to the glass vestibule doors, holding the phone in one hand and the wine glass in the other. Kiara pressed her tear-stained face against the glass, pleading with her eyes, her hands clasped together in desperate prayer. Derek was still sobbing through the speakerphone, begging me to remember the good times we shared. I did not yell at Kiara. I did not curse at Derek. I simply stood there in my beautiful, quiet penthouse, looking directly into my sister's terrified eyes. I raised the crystal goblet to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. I lowered the glass and pressed a single button on the intercom panel mounted to the wall. The camera feed instantly connected to the lobby guard station. "Yes, Ms. Jackson," the head of security answered promptly. "We have a trespasser in my private vestibule," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the large open space. "Please send an escort immediately and permanently ban her from the premises." Kiara heard the intercom. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. She started violently kicking the reinforced glass, screaming obscenities that were completely muffled by the soundproofing. Through the speakerphone, Derek was still rambling, his frantic apologies blending into a pathetic loop of self-pity. "Maya, please, you have to listen to me," he begged. "I can change. I can be the man you deserve. We can start over." I placed my wine glass down on the marble counter. "You are right, Derek," I said calmly. "I am starting over, but I am doing it without a single ounce of dead weight holding me down. Enjoy the food in county lockup." I reached out and tapped the red end call button, cutting him off right in the middle of another desperate sob. I blocked the jail phone number and tossed my phone onto the sofa. I turned back to the glass vestibule just in time to see two large security guards step off the elevator. They grabbed Kiara by the arms, hauling her away as she thrashed and wailed, her designer dress tearing at the seam. The elevator doors slid shut, silencing her completely. My penthouse was finally perfectly quiet again. It took less than 6 months for the federal justice system to completely dismantle the illusion they had all built. The swiftness of their ruin was breathtaking. Chad Miller, the arrogant broker who thought he was untouchable, pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. The judge was completely unmoved by his tears and sentenced him to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. His luxury vehicles were auctioned off, and his firm was completely liquidated to repay his defrauded investors. Derek, the man who traded a brilliant wife for a fake life, fought the charges. He lost spectacularly. A federal jury found him guilty on all counts in under 2 hours. He was handed the exact same 15-year sentence as Chad. They were assigned to different federal prisons permanently separated from each other, and the stolen wealth they craved. Because of her cooperation and the fact that she was a new mother, Kiara managed to avoid prison time, but she did not escape punishment. She was convicted of a lesser felony and saddled with massive court-ordered financial restitution. The glamorous influencer who once scoffed at working for a living now works 40 hours a week at a fast food drive-through window, wearing a greasy uniform, desperately trying to pay off a massive debt to the Internal Revenue Service while raising a child in a cramped studio apartment. As for my mother, Evelyn, she narrowly avoided jail time by liquidating her remaining assets to pay back the church. The bank successfully foreclosed on my grandfather's beautiful estate. Stripped of her social standing and her stolen wealth, Evelyn now lives in a tiny government-subsidized apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, completely ostracized by the community she once ruled. A year later, I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office at the agency. I was recently promoted to Senior Director of Forensic Operations. I held a steaming mug of black coffee, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline as the morning sun reflected off the glass skyscrapers. My bank accounts were secure, my career was thriving, and my spirit was entirely unbroken. People often ask me how I survived such a profound betrayal by the people closest to me. They wonder how I managed to walk away from my husband, my sister, and my mother without entirely losing my mind. The truth is surprisingly simple. You cannot expect a tree to flourish when its roots are completely rotting in toxic soil. For 34 years, I allowed those people to feed off my energy, my wealth, and my success. I believed that because we shared blood or a marriage certificate, I was obligated to carry their burdens and tolerate their disrespect. But loyalty should never be a suicide pact. When you finally find the courage to take a sharp axe and sever the diseased roots, you do not die. You actually begin to grow. You realize that the heavy weight you were carrying was not love, it was manipulation. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace settle deep into my bones. I am no longer the obedient daughter, the overshadowed sister, or the ATM machine for a fraudulent husband. I am the architect of my own incredibly beautiful life. The toxic roots are gone, the storm has completely passed, and I am finally, completely free. The saga of Maya's systematic dismantling of her betrayers offers a masterclass in self-preservation and the true boundaries of loyalty. The most profound lesson woven throughout this story is that familial ties and marital vows should never be utilized as a trap for exploitation. Society frequently conditions us to forgive the unforgivable, simply because the perpetrators share our bloodline or live under our roof. We are often pressured to keep the peace and absorb the damage just to maintain a fragile facade of unity. Maya's journey completely shatters that toxic expectation. She teaches us that unconditional love does not equate to unconditional tolerance for abuse, manipulation, or financial theft. When her husband, sister, and mother weaponized Maya's loyalty to fund their own selfish greed, they expected her to fold under the weight of maternal guilt and marital pressure. Instead, Maya recognized her own immense value and chose to protect it. She demonstrated that setting ironclad boundaries and severing diseased roots is not an act of cruelty, but a fundamental requirement for personal survival and growth. True empowerment comes from looking objectively at the people who continually drain your energy and deciding that you are no longer willing to finance their illusions. It requires immense courage to stop playing the victim in a narrative written by toxic people and to start acting as the fierce architect of your own life. You have the absolute right to protect your peace, your hard work, and your future from anyone who tries to dismantle them, regardless of their title in your family tree. Take a hard look at the relationships in your own life today and boldly sever ties with anyone who is quietly draining your worth.